The winter of 1873 came early, and it came with a vengeance. The sky over the Nebraska territory was the color of a fresh bruise, heavy with snow that fell not in flakes, but in suffocating white sheets. The wind was a living thing, a predator that screamed through the plains, and it found every crack in Emma Hartley's tiny cabin. She was 23 years old, and she was already a widow. Her husband Thomas was 8 months in the ground, taken by a fever that swept through before she even knew what was happening. Now she was alone with their 4-year-old son, Samuel. The boy was playing by the fire, what was left of it anyway. The last of their firewood was almost gone. The last of their food was a handful of cornmeal and a few strips of jerky. Outside, the woodpile was buried under 6 feet of snow. Staying here meant death, a slow, cold, quiet death. Emma looked at her son, his laughter a painful echo of a life that was gone, and she made a decision. It was a crazy decision, a mother's desperate last-ditch gamble. Come morning, they would walk. They would walk into the heart of the storm and pray they found help before the storm found them. Dawn was just a lighter shade of gray. The wind still howled. Emma fed Samuel the last of the cornmeal, saving none for herself. She wrapped him in so many layers he could barely move. His father's old coat, a clumsy shell around his tiny body. "Where are we going, Mama?" he asked, his blue eyes trusting her completely. "On an adventure," she lied, her smile feeling like cracked glass. They hadn't gone a mile before she knew it was a mistake. The snow was a monster, pulling at her legs, sucking the life from her with every step. She carried Samuel, his weight a crushing burden, but the thought of putting him down was even worse. The cold was a physical pain, 1,000 tiny needles stabbing at her skin. Her feet went numb first, then her hands, and then the most terrifying thing happened. Samuel, who had been shivering violently against her, went still. His shivering stopped. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She knew what that meant. His small body was giving up. It was shutting down. They couldn't go back. She was lost in the whiteout. Forward was the only way, but forward was just more of the same frozen hell. And that's when she saw it. A thin, almost invisible column of smoke, rising against the gray sky. Hope and terror crashed together inside her chest. Fire meant people. But out here, people could be just as dangerous as the storm. She stumbled toward the smoke, her son's still, cold weight in her arms the only thing driving her on. The shelter was a small cave, tucked into a rock formation, shielded from the worst of the wind. As she got closer, she saw him, a man, his back to her, sitting by a small fire. Long black hair fell past his shoulders. Tethered nearby was an Indian pony. His clothes were buckskin, decorated with beadwork. He was a Comanche warrior. Every horror story she had ever been told screamed at her to turn back, to run. They were savages, killers, monsters who preyed on settlers like her. But Samuel was no longer just cold. He was dying. She must have made a sound because the warrior turned. His face was sharp, intelligent, his dark eyes taking her in with an unreadable expression. His hand moved to the knife at his belt. He didn't draw it. He just waited. Emma's legs were about to give out. She had one last terrible card to play. The thought of it made her sick to her stomach. But Samuel's life was worth more than her pride, more than her body, more than anything. "Please," she whispered, her voice a cracked ruin. "My son." The warrior said nothing. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "You can have me," she said, the words tasting like poison. "Do what you want. Just, please, save my son." The silence was absolute, broken only by the shriek of the wind. The warrior's face was a stone mask. He just stared at her, this frost-covered, desperate woman offering herself at the door to his cave. Then finally he spoke. His English was clear, though accented. "You owe me nothing." The warrior rose in one fluid motion, and Emma flinched back, pulling Samuel tighter. But he only gestured to the fire. He laid a thick buffalo robe near the flames, close enough for the warmth, far enough to be safe. "Bring the boy," he said, and there was an urgency in his voice that cut through her fear. She stumbled forward and knelt, her strength finally giving out. She almost dropped her son, but the warrior was there in an instant, his hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her lay Samuel on the robe. The boy's lips were blue. His face was a terrifying, waxy white. Without a word, the warrior began stripping off the boy's ice-crusted clothes. Emma's frozen fingers fumbled to help, her maternal instincts finally overriding her fear. "The cold has gone deep," the warrior said, wrapping Samuel in the thick, warm fur. Then he turned to her. "You too," he said, nodding at her own frozen clothes. "The boy needs his mother alive." He turned away, giving her privacy, and busied himself with the fire. Emma removed her outer layers with trembling hands, shame burning her cheeks as she remembered her desperate offer. He handed her a wool blanket without looking at her. She wrapped it around herself, the warmth so intense it was painful. He melted snow in a small pot, then pulled out dried meat and roots from a leather pouch. "Buffalo," he said, offering her a piece. "Eat slow." She did, forcing herself to chew the tough, flavorful jerky, her empty stomach cramping in protest. And then she heard it, a small whimper. From Samuel. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. Tears blurred her vision. This man, this savage she'd been taught to fear her whole life, had shown her nothing but kindness. He made a bitter, warming tea from herbs in his pouch, and together they coaxed small sips into Samuel. The boy's eyes fluttered open. "Mama," he whispered. "I'm here, sweetheart," Emma choked out. "You're safe." She met the warrior's eyes across the fire. "Thank you," she said. "I'm sorry for what I offered." "You offered what you thought you had," he said, his expression unreadable. "A mother protecting her child. There is no shame in this." "I don't even know your name." "I am called Gray Wolf by your people," he said. "I'm Emma. This is Samuel." He simply nodded and returned to his side of the fire, giving her space. The storm raged on outside, but inside the small cave, a fragile peace began to settle. But Emma couldn't shake the contradiction. Everything she knew about his people was wrong, or this one man was dangerously different. The storm trapped them in the cave for 3 more days. By the second morning, Samuel was sitting up, his childlike curiosity completely overriding any fear. He was fascinated by Grey Wolf. "Can I touch it?" he asked, pointing to the beaded tomahawk at Grey Wolf's belt. Emma's breath caught, but Grey Wolf carefully removed it, letting Samuel hold the handle. "My grandfather made this," Grey Wolf explained, "when I became a warrior." "What's a warrior?" Samuel asked. "A man who protects his people," Grey Wolf said. "Like my papa," Samuel said proudly. "He protected us." Grey Wolf nodded solemnly. "Your father was a warrior." The simple respect he showed for Thomas, for her dead husband, brought tears to Emma's eyes. Over those 3 days, she watched him. He had a quiet, disciplined routine. He cared for his weapons, his horse, the fire, all with a purposeful grace. When Samuel got restless, Grey Wolf carved him a small wooden horse with his knife. "You're very good with him," Emma said quietly one evening. "I had a son," Grey Wolf said, his voice low. "Younger than this one." The past tense hung in the air between them, a shared grief, a silent understanding. They were both haunted. On the 3rd night, Samuel's fever returned. Emma felt the familiar dread, the memory of Thomas's final illness, cold and sharp inside her. But Grey Wolf was calm. He brewed another tea, this time with different herbs. "This one for fever," he explained, showing her each plant. "This for strength. My grandmother was a healer." They worked together through the night, and by dawn the fever was gone. Emma was slumped against the cave wall, exhausted, and realized Grey Wolf had draped his own blanket over her. "Why did you help us?" she finally asked, the question that had been burning inside her. "Your people and mine. We're enemies." Grey Wolf looked at her for a long time. "Are we?" he asked. "You trying to keep your child alive. How are you my enemy? The soldiers who burned our villages, yes. But you?" He shook his head. "The storm does not care if you are white or Comanche. Neither does hunger, or cold, or loss." His words hit her with the force of a physical blow. A wall inside her that she never even knew existed began to crumble. On the 4th day, the storm began to break, and a new tension filled the cave. Their time in this strange sanctuary was ending. Soon she would have to go back. Back to her broken cabin. Back to the town that had shunned her even before this. She watched Grey Wolf patiently teaching Samuel how to braid leather. In that moment, she saw not an Indian, not a savage, but simply a good man. A man who had shown her and her son more kindness than any of her own people. That night, as Samuel slept between them, she asked the question she was dreading. "What will you do when the storm ends?" "Continue west," he said softly. "Alone." The word hung in the air, heavy with a sadness that mirrored her own. Near dawn, she woke to find him standing at the mouth of the cave. The wind had died. Stars glittered in the gaps between the clouds. "Tomorrow," he said without turning. "The storm is finished." The end was here, and Emma felt a weight on her chest, a sense of loss so profound it stole her breath. In a few short hours, they would return to a world that would see the kindness between them as a sin. But for one more night, in the safety of the cave, they were just two people who had helped each other survive. The morning sun on the fresh snow was blinding. Grey Wolf studied the transformed landscape, reading it like a map. "Your cabin is that way," he said, pointing. 2 hours walking, if it stands." That last part, "if it stands," sent a chill down Emma's spine. "We go together," he said. It wasn't a question. "The snow hides dangers. I will see you home." She didn't argue. The journey was a brutal test. Grey Wolf led the way, carrying Samuel on his shoulders when the drifts were too deep. Halfway there, they came to a creek, now a raging torrent of churning ice and meltwater. The only way across was a single fallen tree, slick with ice. "I will go first," Grey Wolf said, and crossed with the impossible grace of a cat. "Send the boy." Samuel was terrified. "Look at me," Grey Wolf called from the other side. "Not the water." The boy took a deep breath and started across. Halfway, his foot slipped. Emma screamed, but it was a soundless scream trapped in her throat. In a flash, Grey Wolf was back on the log, moving with a speed that didn't seem human. He snatched Samuel from the air just as he was about to fall, swinging him to safety. He came back to the middle of the log to help Emma across, his hand warm and steady. She collapsed on the far bank, shaking, clutching her son. An hour later, they saw them. Wolves. 5 gray shadows against the snow, their yellow eyes hungry. Emma shoved Samuel behind her, but Grey Wolf stepped forward. He didn't raise a weapon. He just spoke to them in his own language, his voice low and calm. The lead wolf stared at him for a long, tense moment. Then it turned and melted back into the trees, the pack following without a sound. "What did you say?" Emma whispered, her heart hammering. "That we are not prey," Grey Wolf said simply. "Wolves respect strength." As they got closer to where the cabin should be, Emma's anxiety grew. Then Grey Wolf pointed, a thin thread of smoke rising into the cold air. Someone was there. The cabin was still standing, but the roof was damaged, the door hanging crooked. As they got closer, Emma's relief turned to dread. Grey Wolf held up a hand, motioning for her to stay hidden. He moved forward alone, silent as a ghost. He returned a moment later, his face grim. "2 men," he whispered. "Drifters. They've taken shelter. Burned your furniture." Emma's blood ran cold. She knew what this meant. They would claim the cabin as abandoned. The law would be on their side. "Wait here," Grey Wolf said. "I will speak with them." Before she could object, he was walking into the open, straight toward the front door. The door opened. A rifle barrel appeared. Emma watched, helpless, as a tense conversation began. One of the men, rough and bearded, stepped outside. He was wearing her husband's coat, Thomas's coat. Rage, hot and pure, burned through Emma's fear. How dare he? The second man came out, younger but just as mean-looking. He gestured threateningly with his rifle. It happened so fast she barely saw it. Grey Wolf moved, a blur of motion. The rifle went spinning into a snowdrift. In his hand, as if by magic, was his tomahawk. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. The message was clear. He said something, pointing to the trees where Emma and Samuel were hiding. The drifters looked at each other. They had thought the cabin was empty. They had been wrong. After a brief, tense negotiation, the 2 men gathered their things and left, shooting hateful glances at Grey Wolf, who stood like a statue until they were gone. The cabin was a wreck, but it was theirs again. "They'll come back," Emma said. "Perhaps," Grey Wolf agreed, "but not today." He spent the rest of the afternoon helping her make repairs, his quiet competence a comforting presence. But as the sun began to set, he gathered his pack. I must go. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. No, Samuel cried, clinging to Grey Wolf's leg. Please stay. Grey Wolf knelt. A warrior knows when to go, small one. This is your home. It is not mine. He rose and looked at Emma. He pressed a small leather pouch into her hand. Medicine, he said, for protection, for strength. He turned to leave. At the door, he paused. The men who were here, he said, his voice low, they will go to town. They will talk. Others may come. His eyes met hers. Be ready. And then he was gone. Samuel sobbed at the window, watching until Grey Wolf was just a speck in the distance. Emma held him, her own tears falling silently. The tracks in the snow were already starting to fade. The protection was gone, and the threat was just beginning. The drifters didn't just talk. They told a story where they were the heroes, bravely defending a poor widow's cabin from a murderous Comanche. By the time Emma went to town for supplies 3 days later, she was already a pariah. The moment she walked into the general store, the talking stopped. Mrs. Morrison, the owner's wife, looked at her with cold contempt. We heard there was an Indian, she said, her voice dripping with insinuation. Familiar with you, they said. A man named Grey Wolf saved my son and me from the storm, Emma said, her own voice steady and clear. We would be dead without him. A man snorted from across the room. It was Howard Blackwood, the richest rancher in the county, a man who'd been sniffing around her since the day Thomas died. Indians don't help white women for free, Blackwood sneered, his eyes crawling over her. Everyone knows what they want. Then everyone knows wrong, Emma snapped back. He showed more Christian charity than anyone in this town. Blackwood's face darkened. He stepped closer, his breath sour with whiskey. Careful, Mrs. Hartley. A widow with your kind of reputation is a dangerous thing. Mama, Samuel piped up, his small voice cutting through the tension. Is he talking about Grey Wolf? Grey Wolf's not a savage. He saved me. The store erupted in whispers. The boy had named him. He spoke of him like a friend. It was a death sentence. You let your boy get attached to a Comanche killer? Blackwood hissed. What kind of mother are you? The kind who values her child's life over your petty hatred. The slap was so fast she didn't see it coming. Blackwood's hand cracked across her face, sending her stumbling back. Samuel screamed. You'll mind your tongue, Blackwood snarled. And now we see your true colors, spreading your legs for the first savage who... He never finished. The door burst open and one of the drifters, a man named Jake, staggered in, his face white with terror. Indians, he gasped, coming this way, a dozen of them, armed for war. The store exploded into panic. Men scrambled for rifles. But Emma saw something strange. Jake kept looking at her, and he wasn't looking at her with fear. He was looking at her with a sick kind of triumph. She pushed her way to the window. Riders were on the horizon, but they weren't warriors. They were a small, peaceful trading party traveling under a white flag. It was a lie, a performance, and Emma suddenly understood. This wasn't a random event. This was a trap, and it had been set just for her. The harassment started that night. She woke to find the words Indian lover painted on her door in what looked sickeningly like blood. Her small garden was trampled, her chickens scattered. The town closed ranks against her. Women crossed the street to avoid her. The store cut off her credit. She was being isolated, starved out. She knew who was behind it. Howard Blackwood. He came a few evenings later, flanked by 2 of his hired guns. I've come with a proposition, Mrs. Hartley, he called from the yard. State your business from there. I'm here to help, he said, his voice slick with false sympathy. You're in a hard spot. No man, no money, and now this reputation. Get to the point. Marry me, he said. The words dropped into the cold air like stones. I'll pay your debts. Fix this place up. You'll be respectable again. Protected. Emma's hands tightened on the rifle she held. And if I refuse? Blackwood's voice went hard. A woman like you, living alone, attracting savages to the area. The town might decide you're a danger. They might decide your boy would be better off with a proper family. The threat was unmistakable. Marry him, or he would take her son. He would use the law, use the town's fear, and he would crush her. She was trapped, utterly and completely trapped. You have 3 days to decide, he said, smiling now. For 2 days, Emma lived in a state of quiet terror. She tried to find a way out, but there was none. A woman, a widow, had no power here, especially not one accused of consorting with an enemy. On the evening of the second day, as she sat staring into the fire, planning a surrender she couldn't bear to make, Samuel suddenly grabbed her arm. "Mama," he whispered, his eyes wide. "Someone's outside." Emma's heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed the rifle. Had Blackwood come early? But Samuel wasn't scared. He ran to the window. His face lit up. "It's him," the boy breathed. "It's Grey Wolf." For a second, joy soared through her. Then cold reality hit. If he was found here, it would be the final nail in her coffin. She opened the door a crack. He stood at the edge of the firelight, a shadow in the darkness, but she could see the worry in his eyes. "I heard," he said simply, "in the trading post. What they say, what they plan." "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, even as her heart screamed that she was glad he was. "They watch the front," he said. "I came from the creek. We must talk." She let him in. Samuel launched himself into Grey Wolf's arms. The warrior's stern face softened for a moment, but his eyes, when they met Emma's, were dark with anger. "Tell me," he said. And she did. She told him everything. The lies, the harassment, Blackwood's ultimatum. He listened without a word, his silence more terrifying than any rage. "This man," he said finally, "he uses your laws against you. There is no honor in this." "Honor doesn't matter here," Emma said bitterly. "Only power and money." "You have something else," Grey Wolf said, his gaze intense. "You have truth, and you have me." Emma stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," he replied, his voice low but steady, "that you owe me nothing, but you trusted me when fear would have been easier. Your son looks at me and sees a man, not a savage. That is a gift." He stood up, his decision made. "Pack what you need," he said. "We leave before dawn." "Leave? But where?" "West," he said. "There are places where a family like ours can live." A family like ours. The words hung in the air of the small cabin. It should have shocked her, but it didn't. It felt right. "He'll come after us," she warned. "Blackwood won't let this go." "Let him come," Grey Wolf said, and for the first time, she saw the cold fire of the warrior in his eyes. Emma looked at her son, his face glowing with hope. She looked at the man who had come back for them. She looked at the walls of the cabin that had become her prison. The choice was no choice at all. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We're going with Grey Wolf." 2 days later, the news hit Willow Creek like a lightning strike. A cavalry patrol had been attacked. 3 soldiers wounded. Supplies stolen. The attacker was identified as the Comanche warrior, Grey Wolf. He was now a wanted man. And Emma Hartley was no longer a victim. She was an accomplice, a traitor. Captain Marcus Bradley of the 7th Cavalry stood in Howard Blackwood's study. He was a professional soldier, not a vigilante, and he didn't like the smell of this story. "He's kidnapped her, of course," Blackwood said, pouring himself a whiskey. "The savage has the woman and her boy. She must be terrified." "We'll see," Captain Bradley said, his tone non-committal. At the cabin, Bradley's suspicions grew. There were no signs of a struggle. It looked like someone had packed carefully. And then they found it, tucked behind a loose floorboard. A letter in Emma's handwriting. Bradley read it aloud. "I leave of my own free will. My son and I are not kidnapped. We go to find a life where we can live without threat. Do not follow us." "Lie!" Blackwood snarled. "He forced her to write it." "Perhaps," Bradley said, folding the letter, "but it complicates things. He ordered his men to track them, not to rescue a hostage, but to find the truth. The trail was easy to follow at first. Too easy. It was like Grey Wolf wanted them to follow. They found the first campsite. 3 people. A man, a woman, and a child. No signs of struggle. Then a sergeant called out. Scratched in the dirt, protected by a rock, was a child's drawing. 3 stick figures, holding hands. A small one in the middle, flanked by 2 taller ones. This was not the work of a terrified child. 2 days later, they found the site of the supposed attack on the patrol. Bradley, a veteran of a dozen Indian fights, knew immediately that something was wrong. There were no arrows. The supplies taken were only food and medicine. The ammunition and weapons were left behind. And the wounds on the soldiers. They were precise, meant to disable, not to kill. This wasn't an ambush. It was a warning. Bradley called for one of the young privates from the patrol. Under his captain's cold stare, the boy's story crumbled. They hadn't been on patrol. They'd been in camp, drunk on illegal whiskey. They saw a lone Indian and fired first against orders. The warrior had defended himself with lethal precision, could have killed them all, but didn't. He just took what he needed for his family and vanished. The patrol had lied to cover their own incompetence. Bradley stood over the cold campfire, the truth settling in his gut like a stone. He wasn't hunting a killer and a kidnapper. He was chasing a man who was protecting his family from a world that wanted them dead. 50 miles west, Emma Grey Wolf and Samuel had found a hidden valley. For the first time since the storm, Emma felt a sense of peace. Away from the judging eyes of the world, she saw Grey Wolf not as a Comanche, but as a man. He taught Samuel to fish. He told them stories of his people, of a time before the world had gone mad. He was kind and funny, and carried a deep sadness she was beginning to understand. They were becoming a family, but he was a skilled tracker, and he knew they were being followed. "The army," he said one night by the fire. "They are close." He looked at her, his face serious in the firelight. "You can still go back. Tell them I forced you. They will believe it." "Is that what you want?" Emma asked. "No," he admitted. "But what is best for you?" "Don't," she cut him off, her voice fierce. "Don't you dare make my choices for me. I chose this. I chose you." He reached out and took her hand. "Your courage," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I had forgotten such things existed." The next morning, the fragile peace shattered. Samuel woke with a raging fever. He was too sick to travel. They were trapped. "We make our stand here," Grey Wolf said, his face set like stone. They moved to a more defensible position among a cluster of rocks as he prepared for a fight. Late that afternoon, the cavalry appeared at the mouth of the valley. A dozen men with Captain Bradley at their head. Grey Wolf stood, making himself visible, his hands away from his weapons. "Mrs. Hartley," Bradley called out. "Are you well?" Emma walked out from the rocks and stood beside Grey Wolf. Her action was her answer. "We are here by choice, Captain," she called back. "The law says Grey Wolf attacked my patrol," Bradley said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The law," Emma replied, her voice ringing with passion, "is not always the same as the truth. You know that, Captain. I can see it in your eyes." The silence stretched. Bradley looked at them, then at his men. Emma could see the conflict on his face, duty versus justice. Finally, he made a decision. "Sergeant," he barked, "take the men and scout the North Ridge." "Sir? For how long?" "An hour should be sufficient." The message was unmistakable. The sergeant nodded once and led the patrol away, leaving Bradley alone. The captain dismounted. "You have 1 hour," he said quietly. "After that, I have to pursue. Head south. Blackwood has men watching the western passes." "Why?" Grey Wolf asked. "Because I'm a tired soldier," Bradley said, "and I've seen too much hate. If you two can find peace, maybe there's hope for the rest of us." He turned to leave, then paused. He looked back at Grey Wolf. "For what it's worth, I believe you." Then he mounted his horse and rode away. They had 1 hour to outrun an army, a madman, and the entire hateful world that was hunting them. They traveled south into the harsh, broken country. Samuel, weak with fever, rode on Grey Wolf's back. But their head start wasn't enough. The next morning, Grey Wolf saw them. "Riders," he said, his voice grim. "Not army. Blackwood's men." There were at least 10 of them. Hired guns, led by Blackwood's notoriously brutal foreman, a man named Luther Kane. They were being hunted not by soldiers, but by a lynch mob. The chase was relentless. They pushed on, but the posse gained on them. Samuel was getting worse. They were finally cornered in a rocky ravine. It was a natural fortress, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Keep down, Grey Wolf told Emma, positioning her and Samuel in the most protected spot. Protect the boy. We fight together, she insisted, checking her rifle. He just touched her face, a silent acknowledgement. The attack came an hour later. It was a brutal, ugly fight. Grey Wolf was a phantom among the rocks, his shots precise, disabling men, but not killing them. He was still trying not to kill, but there were too many. They were being pinned down, surrounded. Then Samuel, delirious with fever, began to cry out for his father. The sound distracted Grey Wolf for a single, fatal second. A rifle bullet ripped through his arm. He grunted in pain, but didn't make another sound. Hope was dying. They were trapped, and that's when they heard it. Faintly at first, then echoing off the canyon walls. A bugle call. Cavalry, Grey Wolf breathed, his expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. But whose side? The answer came in Captain Bradley's voice, booming across the ravine. This is the 7th Cavalry. Lay down your weapons. You are interfering with a military operation. Bradley hadn't just let them go. He had followed Blackwood's men. He had anticipated this. The hired guns, caught between Grey Wolf's rifle and a full cavalry patrol, panicked. The fight was over in minutes. Bradley rode forward. His eyes took in Grey Wolf's wound and the sick child in Emma's arms. Your son needs a doctor, he said, his voice all business. Why? Grey Wolf asked again. Why did you come back? Because after I left you, Bradley said, a grim smile on his face, I got a telegram. It seems Mr. Blackwood is wanted by the federal government for land fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. I was just on my way to arrest him when I saw his men riding out. He had played them all. While a medic tended to Samuel and Grey Wolf, Bradley spread a map on a rock. You can't stay here, he said, but there are places, New Mexico territory, mixed settlements where a family like yours wouldn't be. Unusual. He marked a spot on the map. Santa Rosa. There's a priest there who judges a man by his actions, not his blood. They need hunters. And, he looked at Emma, they need teachers. He was giving them more than an escape. He was giving them a future. Before he left, he pressed a small, heavy pouch into Emma's hand. My men found this in your root cellar, he said. Your husband's emergency fund. Gold, enough to start over. As the cavalry rode away with their prisoners, Emma and Grey Wolf stood alone in the quiet ravine. Samuel was sleeping peacefully, the medic's medicine already working. Together? Grey Wolf asked, and for the first time, she heard a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Emma took his hand. Together, she said, not because we have to be, but because I can't imagine any other way. He pulled her close with his good arm. When I saw you in the storm, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I knew you were brave, but I never dreamed you would choose me. You have a people now, Emma whispered. You have us. They walked south into the painted sunset, leaving the hatred and the violence behind them. They were just 3 small figures against a vast landscape, a widow, a warrior, and a boy. But they were a family, forged in a blizzard, tested by fire, and bound by a love that the world said was impossible. 6 months later, smoke rose from a small, solid cabin in the high country of New Mexico. Emma watched from the window as Samuel practiced with a small bow Grey Wolf had made him. He was healthy, happy, and free. They had found their sanctuary. The nearby town of Santa Rosa, led by the wise Father Miguel, had accepted them. They weren't just tolerated, they were welcomed. Grey Wolf's hunting skills and Emma's ability to read and write made them valued members of the small, diverse community. That afternoon, a lone rider approached. It was Sergeant O'Brien, Captain Bradley's old right-hand man. He brought news and a letter. Howard Blackwood is in a federal prison, O'Brien told them. He'll never see the light of day again. Justice, true and final. The letter was from Bradley, now a major in Washington. He wrote that their story, with the names changed, was being used to argue for more humane policies on the frontier. Your courage, he wrote, gives hope that our peoples need not be eternal enemies. Live well. Raise that boy to be the bridge between our worlds. He had also, through legal channels, registered their homestead claim, and had Gray Wolf honorably discharged as an Army scout, giving them the full protection of the law. That night, sitting by their own fire, in their own home, Emma leaned against Gray Wolf's shoulder. The world outside was still wild, but in here there was peace. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The old life?" "I miss my people," he said, "but I would not trade this. My people have a saying, the eagle may soar alone, but the wolf thrives in family." He looked at her, then at the door to Samuel's room. "I have my family." Emma thought about the journey that had brought them to this place, from a desperate flight in a blizzard to this quiet, peaceful moment. They had crossed the greatest distance of all, from fear to trust, from stranger to family. The medicine pouch Gray Wolf had given her still rested near her heart. It had promised protection and strength, but she knew now the real medicine wasn't in the herbs and stones. It was in the courage to see the humanity in another person and the love that could bloom in the harshest of winters. Thank you all for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and let me know your thoughts about Emma and Gray Wolf's journey. What touched your heart the most? Share your reflections and let's keep these powerful stories of love and courage alive together.